And thank you for joining us. With me today is co-host Richard Fields and friend of the show, John Cameron. I'm host James Just, and we're here to talk about the politicizing of the coronavirus. It's been politicized in a number of ways. We've got women are all angry because at the president because of something or another. We have the Congress playing games with pandemic response, whether they get unemployment or the stimulus check. They're arguing over details. So what do you guys think about all this, the politicization of this coronavirus?
I'll just be happy when the next president is actually inaugurated, because that's when the politicization will probably end. And there's a politicization on both sides. The Democrats are trying to keep the issue alive because they think it's the easiest way to demonize Trump with something that people are particularly concerned with right now. Women in particular are concerned because they're harder hit economically. And of course, that's not the virus that's hitting them economically. It's the lockdown. But the lockdown is making women who unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, are still primary caregivers, housekeepers, caregivers for their children, etc., putting them in a position where they really don't have time to continue their careers as well as take care of their kids and keep the house. That's assuming they still have jobs. People are unhappy with the situation. They don't really understand why there's confusion about whether the virus is as serious as it's made out to be, but they're really unhappy with the state of the situation as it is right now, and understandably.
And I absolutely agree with all that, and would add, I just read an article in, I think it was Foundation for Economic Education, and they had a little chart there about unemployment rates in red states versus blue states, basically because of the red states versus blue states response to the pandemic or whatever you want to call it, the control of virus. And the red states are doing significantly better financially. Their unemployment is much lower than blue states because the blue states are pretty much locking down everything, and the red states aren't yet. From the numbers that I can see, the virus deaths and virus cases and everything else pan out to be slightly better in the red states than blue states. And again, the blue states are typically, higher population areas and all the rest of that. But they're also, some of those states were the response by the governors was particularly egregious, affecting the groups of people that we know are most hard hit. For example, New York's wonderful idea of sending COVID patients back to care homes that probably resulted in about 10,000 deaths. So, and I think it's not. Richard made a very good point that it's not the epidemic or pandemic itself; it's a response to it. And we talked about politicization, I don't know, whatever the word is, and it's it's the same thing with school districts, or kids back in school. It has nothing at all to do with the raw numbers of cases or anything else, because we all know none of the evidence points out that kids are at risk, as some eminent medical scholars have pointed out. More kids have died of the flu since this thing started than died of coronavirus, and they don't catch it. And if you don't catch it, you can't spread it. And if they do catch it, they aren't affected by it. So the schools are shut down, which has the effect of keeping women at home to take care of kids and homeschool and all the rest of that. Because no matter how equal people talk about the marriage being and the burden of chores and child rearing and everything being more evenly split, we all know that's not the case. And it's all has to do with who's in power in the governor's chair in the state. So it's all political. And
when politicians pass laws, it becomes political by the very nature of politicians passing laws. You can't get away from it. It's going to become political when you have political solutions. And we've got a large number of heavy-handed political solutions or no political solutions, and so therefore it's become politicized. And the fact that we're surprised that way it's become politicized is the surprise in of itself. It's not that it's become politicized, it's that we're surprised by it. We have governors running their states by executive orders. We've got the president who is running the country by executive orders, and far too many of us seem to be okay with that.
Not me. Can I just go on record as saying not me? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think and so we're getting a bunch of people upset. It's because for 7 months now we've kind of destroyed whatever governmental norms we've had. It's no longer
just since this whole thing started, we've created more money, 22% as much money as has been created in the entire history of the country. It's which is going to lead to hyperinflation or worse in coming months. That's not visible quite yet, but it will be sooner rather than later.
And it's shocking to me that all of the press I'm seeing, except for those outliers like Cato maybe and Reason and a couple others, are stating that what needs to happen is a pandemic debt package. How about we just talk about end the pandemic so we don't have to do any of these other things? So that the big banks and Wall Street and government agencies and governments, all the rest of that, have a vested interest in keeping this thing going because it gives them an excuse to print money and buy more favors from their friends. And it's hard to raise taxes to do that, although they're trying really hard in the state of California to raise taxes every which way they can, so that they can hand money to their friends. But printing it's much easier. Print it and hand it to your buddies, and as long as they've got this, then what was that quote you said? Who did that, Richard? A crisis is a terrible thing to waste, or something like that.
Yeah, Rahm Emanuel. Yeah.
Well, so crisis is hard to waste. We have 24 hours left from, I guess, Pelosi or Trump. I forget which one of them gave a 48-hour notice yesterday to get their stimulus negotiations done. And of course, why they won't just pass the stuff that everybody kind of agrees on and then argue over the stuff other.
Come on, Nancy, make us more promises. Promise that. Make us more promises like that. We would love to see no more bailout money passed, because the solution to the problem is to end the lockdown, not to bail out the people who are hurt by the lockdown.
Well, absolutely. That's what I tried to say, only I used way more words than that.
Well, I think part of the problem we have is we've got lots of people unemployed, especially in California, who don't have jobs to go back to. And if you can end
but you still have to end the lockdown in order for those jobs to come back. That's the only solution. Back in World War II, the spending for the federal government was cut by 75% between 1944 peak World War II spending and 1948, over 4 years, 75% reduction in spending. What happened? The economy boomed. We can do that again. We should. There will be dislocations, but that's the price you have to pay for decades of profligacy.
So what if we had to, as libertarians, if we had the ability to take out the red pen and just cross off government agencies and government spending and all the rest of that, what would be number one? What would be number two?
Let's do it a little bit differently. Let's say what would remain. The Department of War, which is what the Department of Defense was originally called, that would remain. We need to have defense. But by defense, I mean defense, not offense, in 150 countries around the world. That would remain. And the Secretary of State to maintain, Department of State to maintain friendly relations with other countries, and whatever else, the 3 or 4 cabinet departments that were in place at the beginning of the Republic. Those would remain. Everything else would go.
So we'd be looking at federal spending of $100 billion, maybe?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can do the math in a lot of different ways, but 75% cut would be real easy.
Yeah,
you could probably save half that on just military spending alone. And speaking
military spending is actually only about 30% of the budget, but
it's all Medicaid.
You probably want to retain, maybe a third of that. So that'd be 20 billion, 20 whatever, 20% of the budget. But I mean, you've got the elephant in the room are the transfer programs: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. That's that, along with interest on the federal debt, is 2/3 of the budget, and a few other welfare programs. So those are the elephants in the room. And just take a look at Medicare and Medicaid, which everybody loves, particularly people of my age love, because we think we're getting free medical care, but we're not. We're paying higher co-pays now than people without Medicare pay in countries like Singapore, where the cost of medicine is about 25% of what it is here. The cost of medicine prior to Medicare was 5% of GDP. It's now 18% of GDP. That's because of the paperwork, paper pushing, and inflationary situation where you've got a monopoly buyer, a monopsony. That's
there's another big thing going on in that. If you look at wages in healthcare professions, and I'm not even talking about the layers of bureaucracy and paper pushers and all the rest of that. A ton of that expense is in inflated wages in the monopoly that you're talking about, because there are a monopoly. These nurses unions and doctors unions and dentist unions and all the rest of that charge some exorbitant fees to have their what are they, serfs? They're highly paid serfs, doing the care that we're getting. And because, people who are covered by this never see they don't see a balance sheet or income statement. They just see that they can go to the doctors and they don't have to write a $10,000 check. They don't care. You look at,
it's real. It's the problem to healthcare expense is real simple. Get the government out of it, lock, stock, and barrel. It's real easy. Not easy to implement, but easy to formulate.
Yeah, get the transparency and honest pricing. You can actually deal with it. This whole notion of discount versus cash pricing is insane. And what people don't know is you can actually get the discount rate if you pay cash just by asking for it. But since nobody knows to ask for it, they don't get it. And it's just, so the whole system is kind of bizarre. But speaking of bizarre systems, there's confusion over Prop 15 about who actually pays costs of property taxes, business pay. And consumers pay all costs.
That's the split property tax. Is basically a halfway repeal of Proposition 13, I believe. The Jarvis proposition, which froze property taxes for both businesses and residences. What the tax raisers are trying to do is to say, well, that's okay for residences, at least for now, but we need to go after these big corporations who never change hands because they're in the corporate structures, so their property taxes never go, or their property values never. There's never a transaction to establish a new property value, so we need to, make sure that businesses pay on assessed value and not transaction value. What it will do, obviously, is it will raise the amount of taxes that corporations pay. Do corporations pay taxes? Never has ever a corporation paid a tax. The only people that pay taxes are people. In the case of a corporate tax, is paid by either the customer, number one, and most of the time the shareholder or the employees. Those are the people that pay taxes whenever taxes go up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shareholders and reduced dividends, employees and reduced wages, consumers and higher prices. Those are the people that pay taxes. That's what will happen with a property tax increase for corporations.
And what the people pitching these increases in property taxes, I have one thing to do. Hold on just a second. I'll have to be quick for a change because I got to leave the show for 1 minute and come right back. What they failed to say is that the properties, well, you said frozen, Richard, taxes on them aren't actually frozen.
Yeah, they go up 2 or 3% a year or whatever.
Yeah. So what if government spending, and that was close to what they assumed inflation to be, if government spending hadn't gone through the roof, then and they hadn't added so much spending up and down the board, then they'd be fine. And if you look at the amount of taxes being paid now on property versus when Prop 13 was put in, the increase is huge. It's just not big enough to cover the drunken, drug-crazed spending of our governments. And I'll be right back.
Yeah, there seems to be a group of people who do not understand that the end consumer pays all costs. It's just on the business line, it's just a cost. Whatever the cost is, be it taxes or insurance or mortgage payment, it all comes out of the customer's pocket at the end of the day. The customer has to pay these costs, and they're trying to pretend that they're not. And it's, we need this money for schools and all this stuff. Well, maybe you shouldn't be so bloated, and then you could actually have some money for schools. We're sitting here watching in Sacramento, Unified School District. This has been a bloated, non-functioning school district since I went to there as a kid. It was bloated when I was a kid going to the school. It was bloated when my kids went through it, and then it's a bloated, non-functional school district now. And yet we're supposed to continually pay more and more taxes to cover that costs, and it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, there's a reason why private schools, whether even the most Tony private schools, the tuition is less than what we spend on public school costs. All sources of cost considered, when you consider the fact that you've got federal money through the DOE, Department of Education, coming in, you've got state money coming in, as well as local property tax funding for schools. The public schools end up spending more money than certainly all Catholic schools or religious schools, and more than most private high-end private education.
Yeah, and if you look at the administrative costs in the California State University system, I don't know what it is for the University of California system, because we have two different systems of quote unquote public education or government education. Administrative costs have been rising at 18% a year. 18% a year.
Yeah, and again, it's because free money in the form of student loans, which people who are 18 think, I guess they kind of figure they'll never have to repay it or something. I'm not sure, but it's easy to borrow money when you're having fun, going to parties, having a great time in college, and getting a degree that is not going to be worth as much as you think it is. But all of that demand, that loan-inspired demand, has allowed colleges to raise prices indiscriminately.
And they'll continue to do so as long as they're not kept in check. And the pitch is always that's what I hate about politics. In commerce, when you make a sales pitch to somebody, you're pitching either features or benefits, and hopefully you're preaching benefits. But there is actually a correlation between what you're selling and what you provide. Whereas in the public sector, these sales pitches for raising taxes to support schools, they're pitching that they are going to spend it on educating the kids, and without it, the roof's going to leak and all the rest of that. But what you're buying is a whole bunch of bureaucrats who retire with bloated pensions and a very poor quality product of future workers. So, again, I think the first thing that I would do if I had the magic monarch of the universe wand and could wave it would be get rid of forced education, the so-called public education, which is government education. And all they teach is government. They teach in history classes. They don't teach about the advances that people have created through hard work and ingenuity, or very little, maybe 5% of the curriculum. The rest is all about government-caused wars and government-caused massacres and which dictator was in place during a certain period of time. I'm done with that. That kind of stuff should not be what's important to people. What they need to learn about are what people are capable of doing and have accomplished: great music, great art, great inventions, which is done by individual people, not by governments. Governments make problems; they don't fix them.
And an understanding of how economies work. Economics is at best an elective in most public schools.
Yeah, and I don't,
and the way they teach economics is pseudo-economics anyway. It's Keynesian nonsense.
Keynesian nonsense, and I think it's culminated in the knowledge which would have made me cry, but I've kind of already cried out about what's going on. That New York Times did a 2,000-word article on Venezuela, and and didn't mention the word socialism once. So, may you live in interesting times. Yeah.
Well, as we're speaking of the New York Times read an article earlier this week, or last week, I guess it is, that as local newspapers dies, there's a pay-to-play network of news is rising in its wake, they claim, and they're complaining. It's actually a complaint that this new wave of newspapers, of news delivery channels, is now replacing them, and they're all upset about it. Oh, it's how terrible it is.
Well, the news business has always been pay to play. I mean, it's always been paid for by advertisers. Do you think advertisers have influence on what the newspaper or the radio station or the TV station considers to be news, what gets spiked, what doesn't? Of course, it has an influence. It's always been pay to play. What's happening now is become more partisan in that the payers are now not necessarily businesses paying for advertising. It's Republican and Democratic, I'm sure, operatives paying to get stories placed. And in some cases, the stories are questionable as to the credibility. Mm-hmm. And it's done through a number of broadsheets or news outlets or web outlets that are replacing what used to be your weekly or daily local newspaper.
Yeah, I think it used to, you talk about paper play in the newspaper industry. I remember an actual incident where I visited a newspaper in Belleville, Illinois, and they had published they had a very good article about police brutality and I think some corruption, and advertisers pulled left and right. They didn't like it because they were, and this is an area border between a predominantly upper middle class or white area and a predominantly lower class, predominantly black area. And their advertising revenue dropped by, I don't know, 20% almost instantly. People said, we don't want you printing stories like that. We don't want you, we love our police, and they need to keep those sons of on the other side of this law. Anyway, and the newspaper publisher said, too bad, we're going to publish the news. And, if you want to take your advertising dollars somewhere else, take them. But that was in the glory days of the newspaper where, you couldn't take your money to the internet. And, radio was strong and all the rest of that. But you basically had to have an ad in the local newspaper if you wanted the doors of your business to stay open. Richard and I remember that those days where shoppers took a little bit of bite out of that, but newspapers were money machines. Like the Sacramento Bee, that's bankrupt, was in 2006. Its share price was $700 a share. So anyway, crazy times. But I think newspapers had, by the very the power that they had, a little more ability to stay objective in the market, and they weren't. I don't remember them being as blatantly one-sided and as massively pro one political.
Yeah, well, I mean, newspapers have historically always leaned on their editorial endorsements page, at least, to favor Democrats. That's been true historically. It's probably more so now than it has been. But you also have to take a look at who was doing the influencing. Back then, it was businesses. Now it's politicians or political operatives. That's the difference. And that's a little bit scary, actually, because it makes the degree of pressure first-degree pressure rather than second or third-degree pressure. It's politicians trying to save their bacon rather than businesses trying to save their bacon, which can be bad, but not as dire. Businesses don't have the same kind of control over the citizenry that government does. And
it's very
rare. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of money floating around in political advertising, and so it's not just politicians. They spend a lot of money on commercials and advertising on, if not even on the newspaper, but on the newspaper's websites. And my biggest problem with the newspaper is I don't learn anything from it. You can sit there and you read the newspaper every day, and I don't learn anything new from the sector.
Well, and the other part of this whole thing is that government has the ability to control whether or not any news outlet survives or dies simply through changing regulations. That's why we're seeing Twitter bow to democratic pressures to stifle and spike conservative news stories. That's why we see Facebook knuckling under pressure. That's why, part of that, of course, is the editorial opinion on those at those outlets from the get-go. But a lot of it is just knuckling under pressure. And government pressure is a hell of a lot more dire. They can put you out of business by edict, whereas businesses can put, or advertisers can put publishers out of business only through lack of revenue. That takes a lot longer, and there's always other sources of revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always other customers, right? If you're a business, there's always other customers.
You don't see Apple. Yeah, better, quicker analogy is probably you don't see Target putting together armed patrols to go take business from Walmart. And, basically that's the difference between a business relationship and a government relationship. All business relationships, unless they're government established monopolies, and we have way too many of them now because government is in everything, are voluntary. You can vote with your feet. Unfortunately, when government passes regulation or law, you risk going to jail or fined or both for simply not doing what they want you to do. So it's a much tougher world. Yeah.
It's even hard to escape taxation by voting with your feet. California is now trying to send the tax man after people that leave the state for a number of years.
Yeah, for like 10 years or something. They wanted to pass a tax where they can get you your income for like 10 years after you've left or something.
I find even this environment, I would be really, really hard pressed to see that standing a constitutional muster.
All right, well, that is about all the time we've got, though. And I want to tell you that the reason I can give you a quick example of why people mistrust the media. The very first question I was asked when I sat down for the editorial board with the Sacramento Bee was, "Aren't you really a Republican?" That was the very first question I was asked by the Sacramento Bee editorial board. And you want to, so that's
what was your answer? Did you just laugh out loud?
No, I just gave them the straight answer. I've been a libertarian since the late 90s. There was no reason getting all upset of that. That's all the time we've got. You can visit us at libertariancounterpoint.com, and you can find us on all the various social media outlets. Thank you for your time, and please remember to love everybody.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.